Hello everyone, my name is Keone, and in this video, I'm going to tell you all about something that I refer to as the ego's approach. And I'm also going to go over what the ego is and how we can change it or build it into what we want it to be so that we can become who we want to be. So right off the bat, I'm going to go over what the ego is. And uh, I'm going to just switch to a scene here. Bing! There it is. This is a definition of the ego. In this instance, we're going to be using the definition of, in metaphysics, it's a conscious thinking subject, but it's also these other things. So right off the bat, according to the dictionary, the ego is a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance. Even more so, though, the second definition is kind of the one that uses it the best. It's the part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. Yes, that is what the ego is. In a sense, our ego is our personality, um, which kind of sounds confusing at first, but it helps to realize that we are immortal spiritual beings having a temporary human experience, a linear experience, or physical, I guess. So we're spiritual beings having a physical event, experiencing this physical event. Uh, what this means is that we before we came here, we were not people who were defined by certain things. Like we existed as identities. We were aware of ourselves. We were aware that we existed, and we had the uh, knowledge that we could be anything or were anything that we wanted to be. In this sense, we were also created with the origin of having a sense of love, joy, and peace. That's our true spiritual self. That's who we were before we came here to Earth, to this linear experience. And in knowing this, when we came here, we forgot all about of who we really were. There's a veil of forgetfulness, I guess if you want to call it that, but there's a veil over our minds until we awaken past it. That basically it caused us to forget who we were as spiritual people, which allowed us to immerse ourselves in this game we call life. Um, the ego's part in this, or our personality, our identity, or whatever, uh, the ego's part is this. It's a part of our vessels here. Um, it, it's what we use to define who we are so that we're able to discern individuality. Um, and also, it helps us become aware of other people's individual identities, I suppose. It sounds very complicated because I'm using a lot of big words. Essentially, um, our our ego is who we identify to be. Uh, so we develop this ego or this personality, first of all, when we come here and obtain a physical form. Uh, these these labels are things that can be hard to change physically, uh, but always remember that these things are just labels. They are uh, definitions, I suppose, that we put on ourselves so that we can identify as something physically. So these labels, for me, a label that I came with physically is that I have black hair. That's one of my labels. Uh, it, in that way, you can understand that all of our physical features are simply they're a part of our vessel so that we can have a physical form, and they're just influenced by the things around us. In that same way, our ego is also influenced by the things around us. Uh, for example, certain experiences that we have develop our ego in certain ways. Say, as a kid, you were growing up and you watched, or like, you were really little and your dad probably watched football or something. And as such, part of your ego says, because when we're very young, we're very impressionable, we're in certain mind states that allow us to be very easily influenced, you would then say, oh, I love football then. It's just something I love. It's something I'm into, And in that way, that it develops a piece of the ego. So the point that I wanted to get in to this video, which I mentioned earlier, which is called the ego's approach, is basically our ego's way of approaching all the things that happen in life. For example, our egos are built up of identity, our physical beliefs of who we are. It's the things we like. It's our motivations, our opinions, our beliefs, really. But they're not really who we are, because who we really are beings of spiritual beings, who just put these labels on top of ourselves. So the ego's approach is how our minds, our identity, approaches things from a physical perspective. A simpler way of saying that, it's how we approach things with our physical identity, not our spiritual identity. The idea is that when you have an ego built up, when you have your personality built up in certain ways, you respond to certain things in that same way subconsciously or repetitively throughout your days or your experience here. An example would be, say you were driving on the road and somebody honked at you. And that, you're like, really? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'm just driving. I probably used this analogy in a different video, but you're driving and then you're angry. You're like, oh, I'm angry. The reason you're angry is because this other person, what they did, they honked at you. They got on your case about something you weren't doing. Maybe you were doing something. I don't know. That's besides the point. But regardless, they got on your case. And because they got on your case, because of the response, your natural response, say you watched your older brother, or like you were driving one day, maybe you were watching the bus driver, and something like that happened, and you watch them get angry, and you're like, oh, so that's the appropriate response. When somebody honks, you get angry, right? And so then, to you, naturally, you're like, oh, I'm angry, and that's your ego responding to the situation. It's your physical self responding in the way it's programmed to do so. The reason why this is important to know that that's how it works is because we are able to build our ego into whatever we want to be. I have another video on this called The 3 Things You're Always in Control of No Matter What: Your Thoughts, Your Actions, and What Things Mean to You. And so if you're curious about those things or trying to understand that, the video, I'll try and put a link in the video. But if I'm not able to, because I'm still a little new to this, it'll be available. But maybe I'll put it in the description. But when we realize that we have that kind of control over the things around us, our thoughts, our actions, and what things mean to you, or the influence that they have on you, then we can build our ego into who we want to be. A big part of this, though, is realizing that we don't necessarily need an ego. In order to be able to identify and stay grounded here in this linear experience so that we can go through it fully, we do need the ego in that sense. But when we go into higher vibrations, we don't need the ego, I guess. Basically, that's what I'm trying to get at, is we don't need it, but it is a tool for us, I suppose, with lack of proper further explanation. So the way that we build our ego, we'll use the example of the bus driver again. You realize then that you were influenced by what this bus driver did. And all you have to do, it's actually very simple. You just sit down and you say, that's not how I want things to be anymore. I understand that that's how things might have been. I might have one day watched, geez, English. I might have watched that bus driver get angry, but that doesn't mean that's who I have to be. I can be a normal person. Maybe I was doing something. I mean, not to say like all fault's on me, but to say like maybe I was doing something wrong, and they were just trying to help me out. They wanted everything to be safe, you know. Or maybe it was that you didn't see somebody coming down the road on their bike, and they were just trying to help you be aware. In that way, it becomes something that works for you, it becomes a positive influence, and then it builds your ego into somebody you want to be, which is naturally everybody wants to have love, joy, and peace in their life. They want to have abundance. They want to have uh, abundance coming from their jobs, coming from like income. They want to have love from relationships and friendships, and they want to have a sense of accomplishment. These are all positive things that we want. But oftentimes our ego bogs us down. They say things have to be a certain way. Why? Because I taught myself and I saw this happen a certain way. Somebody told me. I watched my parents do it. Just whatever. It has to be this way because here's evidence of why it has to be this way. But then you realize that it's just a choice. It's just a choice to see that these are the way that things were chosen to be, but they don't need to be that way anymore. And once you realize that, then you really take control of the ego's approach and you influence your life in the way that it's meant to be influenced, which is to have a positive experience. So basically, to recap, our egos are our identity in which we create labels for ourselves through our experiences. Um, when we ascend the ego, we build ourselves into the people we're meant to be, who are immortal spiritual beings having a temporary experience. But the spiritual beings part of us always wants to be in love, joy, and peace. So you raise yourself and have a much greater experience in this life. So with that, I hope that this information helps you become aware of the things you can do to improve your life, if that is something that you choose. I mean, if you're watching this video, then that's definitely something that you want to do anyway. And so I hope that this information helps you, and I hope that you have a good rest of your day, wherever that may be. We'll see you guys in the next video.